Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be tuning in from. Welcome to episode 120 of our Industry Insights, our live stream where we break down everything that's going on around the industry. Jason, this concludes, call it the generalized readout of our data protection trends for 2023, the largest research report in the history of the industry, before we do a 3-week journey on doubling down on certain areas, certain verticals, and then revisiting business continuity, disaster recovery. But want to invite everyone, give a shout out where you are tuning in from. Our production team says a lot of folks are saying hello out there. I am located in Colorado. Jason's in Texas. We've got our producer extraordinaire in Georgia, and we've got excellent production assistants coming over from Romania. So give a shout out. And of course, feel free to type in any comments, questions that you may have, and the team will get them over to us. Jason, cloud. It's not just one thing, it's a few things, huh?
It's not, right? So at its core, as a service, you can do anything as a service, right? So over the last several weeks, we've explored infrastructure as a service, we've explored platform as a service and software as a service. But for many organizations, when they first started looking at adding clouds, plural, into their infrastructure, one of their first experiences was almost always data protection, right? It wasn't around the mission criticality, but it was around helping to understand what actually is possible. And so BAS, backup as a service, and disaster recovery, DR, as a service, both have fairly mature pedigrees at this point. So not that there's not space for innovation, but I love the momentum that we've seen along the way. Now, it's worth pointing out that last week in our DPR installment, we talked about business continuity and disaster recovery. And one of the data points that came out of last week's episode was how many organizations plan on using the cloud as their DR site, or use the cloud repository as their source for how they'll eventually recover all of their data. So it only makes sense that this week we would double down on that and really look at data protection as a service.
Outstanding. Just a quick reminder to everyone, we've got the link coming up for the full report. Encourage you to check that out. It's 4,200 anonymous responses. They're not all Veeam customers by any stretch. In fact, Jason, I think something like at most 7-8% tops are Veeam customers. So it is a market survey, and it's global, 28 countries, companies of all sizes, all industries, etc. So this truly is the most broadest bit of research you can get. Let's double click on now cloud powered backup.
Yeah, so you want to talk about broad. So let's kind of unpack how this data works. So the Data Protection Trends Report has been our macro industry report for the last several years to understand where the market is going. And we use that data not just for the marketing and for these live streams, we use it to affect how we build products here at Veeam. And so we've been asking some of the same questions year over year. And that's actually what you're looking at here. So these 6 bars in each of the last 4 years, and starting from the left in 2020, 21, 22, and 23, for each of those 4 years, we've asked what percentage of organizations are using the cloud as part of their data protection strategy today versus not. And you can see that there's been a rather gradual decline, and in fact, it's kind of flattening out a little bit over these last 4 years. But also, and we'll double back on this in a minute, each year we ask, what do you think you're going to be doing 2 years out? And so in 22, they told us what they thought they're going to do in 24. In 23, they told us what they thought they were going to do in 25. Dave, collectively, this represents 10,000 unbiased organizations over 4 years of asking this particular question. So and it's amazing that with such a random sampling 4 years running, the curve and the shape of the data is so perfectly consistent in time. Let's take a look at first of all, let's take a look at the headline. So this year, organizations say that about 67% say that they are the cloud is part of their data protection strategy, using either a cloud-based service like Amazon or Azure and just using cloud storage, and or leveraging a backup as a service as a managed service offering, 32% are not. It's worth pointing out the missing 1%, that's the rounding error that happens when you aggregate data over all of those responses overall. So this is where we are. 2 out of 3 orgs, Dave, are using it today.
Yeah, I like to use the phrase sometimes something's not near, it's here. And in a few weeks at KubeCon, when we're going to have a live guest from Amsterdam, that'll actually be our talk track around containers. But as it relates to cloud-powered backup, I think many of us are used to the concept, but we may not, as overall aggregate, be used to just how fast, to your point, 2 out of 3 are exploiting the cloud in some manner today. And in fact, some organizations, we should point out, utilize the cloud in multiple different ways.
Oh, yeah. So, for example, it would not be unreasonable that your data centers would be leveraging simply cloud storage. So you have a self-sufficient backup solution within the data center already. Hopefully it's Veeam. And then you're leveraging cloud-based storage as the repository for that. Alternatively, though, if you're having production workloads in Amazon or Azure or Google Cloud, or hey, how about M365? How about Salesforce, right? So for any of those, why wouldn't you use one cloud to back up another? And because many of those require expertise, I'm a huge fan of managed backup services so that you have really smart humans in one cloud protecting all your mission critical data in another cloud. I just think that makes sense. So yes, absolutely, this data would show more than one cloud powered backup scenario in aggregate. So this is where we are today, 2 out of 3 organizations doing that. But it's worth pointing out that when you look at the rest of the data as the 5-year curve, there's a couple of things that we've talked about before. The first one that's worth noting is on the left-hand side, we see that in 2020, that is pre-COVID. And then starting in 21, that was post-COVID. And so like every other aspect of cloud, COVID was a forcing function, which did create some modernization at a faster rate than normal. And that's where you see that step down from 40 down into the low 30s overall. But I think there's another point that's worth bringing up. And in fact, Anand, our CEO, brought this up. He highlighted part of this slide as well. And that is when you look at the 2-year intent, right? So yeah, so the last couple of years has been kind of flat, but when you look at where organizations want to go with their cloud backup strategy or cloud as part of their backup strategies, in 2022, 67% today, but they said they wanted to get to 79. This year it's 67 again. They're tempering their expectations, and yet there is still more intent to add more cloud to their data protection strategy. So that intent, I think, is still going to guide purchasing and proofs of concepts and where organizations want to go with their data protection strategies moving forward, which is probably not a bad segue to let's talk about the why, Dave. Why is it that backup as a service is so compelling for organizations today?
Yeah, and on that previous slide, not a surprise to me that we saw the last data point go down slightly.
Yeah.
Meaning in 2025, because very often organizations don't deploy technologies as fast as they aspire to or think that they might. So that jump, 2022, and what they thought they would do in 24, pretty good jump of plus 12%, exploding more cloud. Consistent, what's your actual year over year, 2022, 2023. I think this year when we surveyed the 2-year response in the future, it was we may still aspirationally want to do that. It's just taking a little more time, or now we have a little more understanding. We're on the journey. We understand we're not going to get there in 12 months or less now. It's going to take a bit longer than we thought, but it's still directionally our intent. So no surprise that went down from my perspective.
No, and also certainly I think we've seen a lot of organizations that we talk to that have said that they really emphasize shoring up their modernization of their production clouds in 2021 and into 2022. And so now what they've done is now their productions are fully cloudy and fully managed and all the wonderful things that happen with that. And now it's time for the other shoe to drop, right? It's time for that other ice skate, as you will, for the protection of those clouds to catch up along the way. Okay, but we got more data to share. So let's talk about the why folks are moving this direction. And then it's probably time to figure out how the map is going as well. the data that you're looking at here, so this actually comes not out of the DPR report that we're citing mostly this week, but we kind of treat the data protection report as kind of the tips of many icebergs. And one thing that DPR showed us years ago is how much interest there is around cloud. So in our cloud protection trends report, this data came out. What we asked here was, why are you using backup as a service? We saw the momentum on the last slide. Let's look at the why. Dave, I've color coded this a little bit just to make it more interesting for folks. There's a lot of answers on this screen. The long lines are choose all that apply. The short lines are what was most important as a single response. If you just look at the responses overall that were over 30%, right? So at least 30% or more of organizations said this is why they do BAS instead of just managing their own backups. You actually see a common trend. There's hardware upgrades, there's backup anywhere, there's complexity, there's footprint. To me, it all seems to come down to operational efficiency, maybe.
Yeah, I think it's definitely operational efficiency, and we can take another view around financial efficiency as well. And that's why I think you see lots of different responses when it's a choose most important, right? You don't have one mass winner at like 40% or something
Right.
like that. But it's what's most important to that organization. Like, what would efficiency mean to them in their context? What problem, in other words, are they trying to solve for? So what we see is, still a lot of work to be done in the data center as it relates to backup complexity, infrastructure and supply chain and costs associated with infrastructure, clearly representative in this highlight.
Yeah. Now, if we get rid of the muting and we can take a look at the rest of the list on what was most important, it's probably worth noting that, interestingly enough, the second most important for some, and yet one of the least common responses was just subscription model, right? So I think the days of as a service just means you're going to pay for it differently, those days are over, right? So almost every product, on-prem and cloud managed based, can be subscribed to. You pay as you drink, that kind of model. But it really seems like it's much more around outcomes now and not just a different consumption vehicle. I think that's a maturation of the market, and I think that's good for everybody.
Fully agree.
Yeah. Speaking of everybody, how's the map going? Where are folks chiming in from for today?
So in the United States, we've also added Florida, additional people from Texas. Looking
Nice.
across the pond here, we see Germany, Romania, United Kingdom, France, Slovakia. Also have, if we go to, let's see, somewhere we
No
have
one in
South.
South America yet. That makes me sad.
Yeah, yeah. We have El Salvador, and we've got South Africa, Angola, Nigeria, and Thailand, Indonesia. And it looks like
Nice.
we've got a couple other countries as well that are popping up in there or populating in there. So that's outstanding. Thank you very much for that. Keep the comments coming where you're tuning in from. And if you have any commentary or questions, happy to take those live as well.
So that's backup as a service, right? And as I mentioned, when many organizations first start off in the cloud, just put your data in somebody else's box is one thing. But as I have said for years, and as you have periodically quoted me on, so the question really becomes, why BAS when you can DRAS, right? So the idea being, okay, it's one thing to put your data up in cloud, know it's going to survive, it's going to be cost effective, hopefully it's well managed, but then you're going to suck it all back down on-prem when you recover. Well, I'm kind of lazy. I'd rather just spin up VMs in a cloud and run my stuff there and just get back to doing business. So the question you ought to ask yourself, why BAS when you can DRAS? And so we've been surveying that data point as well. Let's take a look at that. So in this case, looking at the same, we've asked the same question over 4 years. Those folks that are using just self-managed data centers, and I want to make sure that we point out there is nothing wrong with self-managed dual data centers.
Right.
I love, like in the Americas, East Coast protects the West Coast protects the East Coast. I love the idea that UK protecting down to Italy or Greece and vice versa. I love that geo separation, but still having the same kind of skills, same kind of personnel. I think there's a huge value and agility that comes out of multi data centers protecting each other. But mid-sized organizations, They don't got multiple data centers, right? A lot of commercial organizations don't have multiple data centers. So I love the fact that for many, this unlocks that potential. Dave, probably the coolest part of this is not actually the yellow green versus the blue green, but take a look at the white numbers on top, because I think that speaks to the maturity of the market. And I'm super excited for the trend line on that, on how that's going.
Yeah, and I liked your comment, there's no reason to expect the self-managed to go to zero, particularly if you've
No,
made an investment in that. But another possible driver here could be that more and more data continues to be classified as business critical, mission critical, whatever
yep,
phrase we want to use. So even if you do have a secondary site, even if you own that secondary site, or you're in flight in a contract with a service provider, there are reasons why you still may want to augment that. In other words, you want more and more of your data to be able to fail over to experience BCDR, to your point, not have to pull data back across the wire, stand up infrastructure. And as we saw in the prior chart, assuming you can get that infrastructure with
yeah,
supply chain or cost issues, versus, well, if I got the data over in a target site, why can't I dynamically spin up hardware that I didn't have to pre-allocate, but
sure.
that the provider can make available to me? That gets me more access to more of my data more rapidly.
Amen. Amen. Okay, so first and foremost, I love the fact that overall more and more organizations are embracing this, because for all the reasons you said, now they have an option for a secondary site they didn't have before. And so I love that trend line that you see across the way. But let's take a look at where are we in the status quo, and then talk about where does the momentum think it's going to take us moving forward. First and foremost, I love the fact that 7 out of 10 organizations today think they have a BCDR capability, right? Back when neither of us had gray hair, that was in the 20 and 30% range, and they were all large enterprise, right? And it was never the case that only enterprises needed BCDR.
Right.
It was always the case that only large enterprises could afford BCDR. And so I love the fact that today, I mean, everybody's dependent on their data. So I love that this matches out. It is worth pointing out, though, when you look at how are they able to achieve GR, 7 out of 10 organizations have that capability, but so roughly 24 to 47, if you call that 48, it's almost perfectly 2 to 1, right? So for 2/3 of organizations, their BCDR strategy is cloud powered, whereas 1/3 is using that dual data center approach. Again, nothing wrong with the dual data center, but I love the fact that cloud is very definitively the preponderance of how organizations are achieving BCDR. Thoughts on this, and then we'll look at the momentum.
Yeah, no, I think the curve lines speak really nicely to it. I also like the notion of sort of democratization of DR,
Yes.
making it more affordable to more businesses, or making it affordable to more workloads, even if you are a Fortune 500 company. So there's really almost no reason why an organization shouldn't have a BCDR plan in place today. You don't have to have all the skills yourself. You don't have to pre-purchase all of the infrastructure yourself. You can take advantage of other expertise and other people that have the equipment on demand.
Yep. So you mentioned trend lines. So let's take a look at how that curve is shaping up. The from the data center perspective, it's pretty clean, right? So we're seeing, 30, 28, 34, 24. So let's just call it 28 plus or minus 3 on the data center side. But dang, look at the growth, right? So in the cloud powered side, 23, 30, 36, 47, 53, 55, even though that just like in BAS, there's a little bit more of a tempering overall, still the growth expectation is all coming on that cloud side. And I kind of think folks got it right. I think there's two reasons why, though. I think the cloud gives you a place for to fail over to, right, against the supply chain and the old metal and everything that Dave talked about earlier. The other thing is cloud unlocks expertise in some different ways. We're going to visit on that in a minute. Dave, any last thoughts on this massive momentum shift? Otherwise, let's figure out why.
Yeah, let's double click on why. And as we click the slides, I think we've heard CIOs for a number of years say they don't want to be in the real estate business any
Nope.
longer. So as contracts come up, certainly from a pandemic, we've shifted our workforce allocation or where the workforce is actually doing the work from. And perpetual work at home is more and more a reality. So it kind of makes sense.
It does. It does. Let's do what we did on the last chart. So again, really busy slide. These are all the reasons why organizations said that they are using DR as a service. So a managed service offering for DR versus using just their own secondary data center along the way. If we kind of mute out those things that are under 30%, it tells a pretty similar story. Let's talk from the bottom. Reduce complexity. We saw that in BAS. Compliance. I like that. Freeing up IT operational resources. There's not a single hero scenario, right? So on the other thing, it was just do better, do smarter, work smart, not hard, whatever those phrases were for BAS. When we look at DRAS, there's more of a value creation thing that comes out of this, things like compliance. But I'm given top points. I think the market got it right on this one. Expertise. Right. So just like many organizations don't want to maintain a secondary data center that's dormant, most folks can't afford a certified business continuity planner on full-time staff. And that managed service provides that expertise when you want it, and then alleviates it when you don't. As a CBCP myself, I think that's super smart.
Yeah, the skills have always been an issue, and arguably disaster recovery is more complex, comprehensive, and includes more disciplines than backup as a service. For example, a lot of networking knowledge is required. Yes. A lot of compute knowledge, server knowledge may be required as well. So CIOs have been saying literally for decades that skills are one of their top two concerns. Here, the ability to import expertise, hire that expertise if you don't have it on staff, or the way I read the third one, Jason, is I may have the people that can do this. However, I'm also tasking those people with doing many, many other things simultaneously. So it's a way to do more, advance the business further and faster. So I don't want to just come across as a negative. We're not trying to suggest people couldn't do this. In some cases, maybe they have the skills, they just need to be doing other things as well. In other cases, well, why wait to try to get those skills to shore up that gap? Why not go and import that now, as we see with cyber, as we see with natural disasters? Probably better addressing this sooner than later.
Yeah, so in about 7 weeks, we're going to have our Veeam On user event. And one of the meta themes that's going to come out of Veeam On is around upskilling, right? And the idea of enabling and empowering, in Veeam parlance, we love the backup admin, right? We love that person who's responsible as the last line of defense in protecting all of your data. But I think there are two professional maturations that can come out of this, looking at this data. One is that the person who's used to backing everything up becomes someone who can grow into becoming a certified business continuity planner because they know where the data is. Now they just have to figure out how do I help with the other teams to make sure the data can be reinstantiated after a crisis at scale. So moving from backup admin to DR planner is a very natural progression, but there is a very different set of skills on understanding business process and how that relates to IT dependencies. And those skills are ones that can often be supplemented along the way. And so looking at how do you upskill from backup to DR, we're going to talk about that at Veeam On, and then how do you, as a backup admin, work with those business professionals to understand IT dependencies for prioritization and criticality. That's also part of the conversation we're going to have at Veeam On as well. So two different up levelings of the dialogue. And I think both of those are encapsulated in why many organizations look for outside expertise to supplement and complement their own backup teams. The rest of the list, by the way, you see another kind of expertise that kind of comes in around the plan, those freeing up those resources we talked about. And then only after knowledge and labor do we start to see some of the more tactical stuff, right? Efficiency, SLAs, better technical outcomes, et cetera. But I think they got it right. Lead with the people, lead with the smarts. And then, oh, by the way, the managed part of the service ain't a bad thing either.
Yeah, aspirationally, I look at the bottom of the list, the testing or sandbox environment.
Yeah.
I get why that's kind of a more advanced concept. Let's first make sure the data is recoverable, the systems are recoverable. But boy, I sure would give a commercial or encourage everyone, once you solve for some of the things towards the top of the list, really consider what else you can do with this environment. Be able to do patch testing or be able to do some maybe data mining that you wouldn't otherwise want to subject to production environments. So shout out to that. I know we've got the map ready. Before we hit one more data point, let's go ahead and bring up the map if we could. So we've got in the United States, we added Ohio, Iowa, Arizona, shout
There
out
you
to
go.
my home place, California, Washington, and even more in Texas. Also looking across, we've added Netherlands, as well as we've got India, Pakistan, South Africa again, more people joining in from there.
Very
So super
nice.
shout out for that. Thank you very much for tuning in. Jason, let's hit one more data point really quickly because this is a little bit of myth busting, I would say.
Yeah, you talk about all this momentum towards BAS and all this momentum towards DRAS. And 10 years ago, people were saying, if the cloud takes off, we're finally going to kill tape. Tape is finally dead. Can I please just go on record first as saying 2023 is not the year that tape dies? And oh, by the way, 2024 is not the year that it should. Dave, I know this is a passion area for you. Let's bring this one home.
Yeah, if we look at this distribution, it's not that we're trying to say more data should go to tape than other destinations. It is rather a reflection of, to your point, this technology, meaning tape, has a long tail associated with it, which is getting more and more fan interest because of some of its properties, particularly around literally or technically air gapping versus
Yes.
logically air gapping. It is physically air gapped. And it's not to say you choose one technology or deployment model over another. When we see tape, we see cloud. If you've already made the investment in tape, that certainly makes a lot of sense. However, we still see, LTO cartridges are at record high year after year in terms of media that's being consumed. So it's right tool, right task, Jason. I think the nice thing about all that is you just absorb into your environment or add what's appropriate to you while looking at the investment priorities that you've already made. So we'll drop in the research links into chat. Next week, I'm going to be stepping aside. Jason's going to begin 2 weeks actually of cutting this data by verticals, first looking at financial services, then healthcare, and then double clicking on round two of our business continuity disaster recovery, timed with the new release from Veeam. Encourage you to check all of that out. Thanks for tuning in. Stay safe, stay positive, and we'll see you on the next stream.